Well, unfortunately, the fun ride has come to an end a lot earlier than we were expecting. Welcome in to the Payne and Drain show. Following a Lions loss in the divisional round, they go one and done in the playoffs, losing to the Commanders. Alex, my co-host Alex Drain, as always. How are we feeling after an abrupt end to this Lions season?
Uh, I would say okay. We delayed recording this for a bit. This is Tuesday night, so we're now 72 hours removed, something like that. So some of that time has been allowed to leave the balloon, I guess, and just get it out of the system. And I think ultimately, at least for me, I don't know about you, there was some discussion of this online, but this wasn't as bad to me as last year with San Francisco. Like, and the reason I say that honestly is for me, the big point at which my stress level went down was very early in the game when Mick Robertson got hurt, because that was the second play on the defensive series, second drive of the game, Washington's first possession. And he goes down, and it's pretty clear that it's a serious injury. That the replay looks bad. He gets up, he's crying. They're taking him straight into the locker room, and I was just sitting there like, I want to win this game because I think we can still win this game. This is a beatable opponent, but man, I had been talking myself into the idea that maybe the defense could be good enough to win a few more playoff games if no one else got hurt. And you just get that first one. And I think probably if you're going into this game, you'd say one of the linebackers or maybe Branch would be a bigger concern from injury, but Robertson would be high on that list. Like a guy you just really felt like you couldn't lose. And he goes out so quickly, and it just sent this feeling of like, man, it just feels like we've gotten a lot of signs that this was not our year. And at that point, my feeling, I got a little less stressed. And then as the game unfolded, it was just kind of like, yeah, man, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think to an extent, last year's team had an air of Team of Destiny going on, especially when they jumped out to that lead on the 49ers. There was kind of just this aura that it's like, they're really going to do the thing. They actually might do this. This year, the Week 18 game against the Vikings, that gave me a ton of hope because the defensive performance in that game led me to believe that they would be able to at least hold their own in the postseason. That obviously was not true. And you can blame the Robertson injury, you can blame schematic issues, you can blame a number of things that we'll get into. But the Lions they just didn't have it. They were not as sharp as they needed to be. As you mentioned, it's a beatable opponent. And you got into the fourth quarter of this game, and it was still a winnable game despite everything. But end of the day, the Lions just didn't have the juice. Now, there are going to be a lot of questions long term about the coaching staff and the vacancies that are now needing to be filled by Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, and company. There's also a lot of talk about free agents who to bring back. We are going to do a larger 2024 season recap in the coming weeks. This is going to we'll obviously touch on some bigger topics. We'll talk about the news in the coaching world a little bit later because it has just happened in the last 24 hours. Both Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn on their way out. But we're going to try our best to focus on this game. So to start off with, the offense, which, despite the fact that they put up points and a ton of yards and moved the ball relatively easily, similar to the Houston game, mistakes just kept piling up in bunches. What went wrong?
Mostly Jared Goff, putting it honestly. I don't take pleasure in doing and saying that, but it's just the truth. He had a really good season. He played a lot of good games. This was not a particularly great game. You look at that first drive, they run the ball twice, don't really get anywhere because of a kind of questionable second down play call where you're asking Christian Mahogany to pull all the way around and try to block the unblocked edge, and it doesn't work. So you're kind of behind the sticks on third down, but Tim Patrick is open enough, and Goff puts it behind him. You punt. which not the end of the world. That didn't kill them in the game, but remember, Zane Gonzalez kicks the opening kickoff out of bounds. You get the ball at the 40-yard line. This is a game you feel like we need to go out and score points. That was just a bit of a letdown on a Goff error for that first drive to punt. Then the second drive is going fine, and you get the touchdown. In the third drive, they're driving pretty well. They've been feeding Gibbs, and then Goff puts the ball on the ground. And look, there's many things that go wrong on this play, which we can analyze from different angles. Graham Glasgow gets whipped. Not a great game for him, and definitely stood out. So it's probably going to be a sack. His first read, Goff's first read, is not open because Amon-Ra stumbles. Dan Campbell talked about this in the press conference on Monday. They wanted to find Amon-Ra against Bobby Wagner, and so he doesn't have the ability to get that ball out. I don't care about him taking a sack. That's unavoidable. There are two problems, his first read not being open and the protection breaking down. You can't put the ball on the ground because you look at this play again, this is not a guy thumping him and crushing him into the ground. This is not a guy coming around the edge and in a big punch and the ball's out. He just gets hit. And the way he's got the ball, he doesn't have it secured, and he coughs it up. And it's a very Rams era Jared Goff, 2021 era Jared Goff fumble. And that was a huge momentum swing in the game. And that kind of set the tone early on for what was a poor night. And then the interceptions later. And you look at the drive chart in this game, Lions punted one time. It was that first drive. Every other drive, points or turnovers. And he accounted for 4 of the 5 turnovers.
Yep. And look, on the fumble, obviously Goff has to hold on to it. I actually had a really big issue with the play call in general because
As did a lot of people.
Why are you not running? And we could talk about Ben Johnson and his offensive game plan. It did not feel like the Lions came into this game playing Lions brand of football. Jahmyr Gibbs was amazing in this game, as he has been for the last, whole season. He was like, the Commanders couldn't stop him. And the Lions, they went away from him relatively early. They didn't, if you run the ball there, I would expect Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery, if you wanted to use him, could get 1 yard. If you get points on that drive, even if it's a field goal, let's say, you're up 10-3, it's a much different game early on. Instead, you turn it over. Commanders obviously started scoring in bunches as the game progressed, which just didn't help matters. But definitely felt like Ben Johnson was getting too cute at times. And, can't say the negative without also mentioning the positive. It worked sometimes. The Jameson Williams 61-yard run, that was a too cute kind of play that worked out. But the flip side of that is you also have Jameson Williams throwing passes for some reason in the fourth quarter, which obviously was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, there's some layers here. Starting on just going back to the 3rd and 1. So my issue with this play is not necessarily that they passed. Campbell said it on Monday. It was obvious to anyone who's watched the Lions that they were going on 4th down. That's why you call a pass there, is if it's incomplete, then you're going. I don't have an issue with that. What I have an issue with is empty on 3rd and 3rd and 1. Here's the reason. You can't take a sack there, because they take a sack, no longer you can't go on 4th down anymore. And when you have a non-mobile quarterback and you go empty on a play where you can't take a sack, right? If it's 3rd and 9, you go empty, who cares? Takes a sack, it's not going to make the biggest difference. But a sack is huge here. And when you go empty with a non-mobile quarterback, you are risking, if our protection isn't good, we can sack ourselves out of 4th down range. And that's exactly what happened. So I would prefer, if we're going to pass on 3rd and 1, just have the running back in there for blitz pickups and for help in pass protection. Give him that little extra time. That's my main issue with it. Otherwise, this play is just the case of sort of the Monday morning quarterbacking, in that when Ben Johnson calls the play, it's really hard for him to imagine every layer of this play going wrong, right?
Yep.
The receiver trips, the protection breaks down, and the quarterback puts the ball on the ground. It's a really hard outcome to foresee. But beyond that, Goff has a couple more really huge turnovers in this game that really do swing the trajectory. You get the pick 6, which was a really brutal swing in this game. If I remember, it was 17-14 at that point. That was right after the McLaurin long screen and run. And based on the way the game had developed at that point, it seemed fairly clear to me that this was going to be a shootout. This was going to be a very high scoring game. The offense was going to have to keep pace with a Washington team that at that point was showing no ability to really be slowed down by the Lions. And the last thing that you can do there is hand 7 free points. Your
Well,
defense getting killed, and you're giving up 7 free points on offense.
that whole sequence was brutal because the Terry McLaurin touchdown that came moments before was like we'll talk about the defense in a second, but
Yeah.
just absolutely no resistance, and he gets a screen pass that he takes to the house, and then Jared Goff just airmails it to Tim Patrick. Bad throw, and it gets returned all the way. Like that was the moment I think a lot of Lions fans went, "Uh oh, we we might be in real trouble here." And obviously they were because the Commanders were able to hold a multi-score lead for most of the rest of the game, and obviously they win by 14 in the end. So that was the moment where it was like, oh, this is a problem. Jared Goff does not look right. And now we're down 2 scores, so you can't just rely on the run game, which obviously had been working. And to make matters worse, there was also an injury scare because Jared Goff got popped in the head on the run back and had to be evaluated for a concussion, forcing Teddy Bridgewater into the game. There was just so much bad. That whole 5 minute sequence is when all the vibes left Ford Field.
Well, and you have to remember the other thing that happens right before the interception is there's a first down false start on Laporta.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of several pre-snap penalties on offense, which is just ridiculous for a team that doesn't have many of those, that is at home. You
Mm-hmm.
just can't have it. And it was one of several things that conspired to get them out of the situations they wanted to be in. That's why the fumble is so important in this game, is that if you imagine on that drive they get a touchdown, they go up 14-3. It's a really different game script, right? The
Yeah.
Lions are playing from ahead. They're able to run the ball more, play their style of game. They fall behind, and then when they're putting themselves behind the sticks, that's further depriving them of what they want to do in running the ball. And then the pick six happens, and now the deficit's piling up, and now you have to throw more and more as the game goes along. And that pick six was just brutal because it's 2nd and 14. Sam Laporta's open underneath. This is something we talked about. Remember back in week 2 with Goff forcing balls and just not
Yep.
taking the checkdowns. Doesn't take the check down. Laporta's going to get at least, to me, 8 to 12 yards on that play. Maybe gets close to the first down because there's really no one around him. And to his credit, Patrick was briefly open, but it's a much harder throw. It's got to be precise, and he sails it, and it's intercepted. And then he gets himself maybe concussed on the run back. That was definitely the uh-oh moment, the sort of we're cooked in this game. But despite all that, they're still in a situation when the next interception happens that the game's still going, right? They're down 10
Mm-hmm.
points, but you're driving before halftime, want to get it back to a one-score game. And as hindsight shows, they did get a stop out of halftime, and they did get a score out of halftime. So if they get points on that drive, they would have been at least tied, maybe ahead back, and the game is totally different. But yet again, a drive where you're not in the red zone, but you're getting close to it, likely going to get points. And Goff throws another interception, and in this one in the end zone. I'm less sure about what happens here. I'm curious on your take on it. Some felt it was Goff, some felt it was JMO. I'm a really bad wide receiver expert on routes and stuff, so I'm not really weighing in on the debate here.
I think it's fair to say that Goff did not deliver the best throw on this play.
No.
If he like this is he underthrows it. If let's say the DB's not there, JMO has to reach down to probably to like his thigh knee area to make that catch. If Goff puts it in front of him, Williams has a half step on the DB. But at the same time, Goff underthrows it. Williams sees that he underthrows it, and he doesn't attack the ball, and he doesn't get back into position to at least contest the catch or make a play on it. Who knows? We know how good Williams has been in some of these contested catch situations when the ball is in and around his chest area. He had the ability to run back into that, and not sure whether he was slow to react or just was hoping the ball would get to him. I think it just ultimately is on both parties, as much of a cop out as that is to say that Williams has proven sometimes he gives up on routes. We saw this in week 18 against the Vikings where Goff throws an arm punt on a first down, and Williams gives up on the route when the ball's in the air because he's like, I'm not getting this ball. Possible that happened there, but I don't know. Just not a great situation to go into halftime.
No, and this isn't all to say that Goff was completely awful. His throw to Laporta on the touchdown was a very nice play. Obviously, most of the credit goes to the Laporta circus catch, but
Yep.
Goff throws that ball while getting hit, almost down by the time he releases it. So that was a nice job by him. And he had one throw on like a sort of slot fade to Amon-Ra that was a beautiful catch
Yep.
and throw. There was a holding on that as well that didn't even matter because it was such a good play. So he had his moments, but it it was really poor overall in terms of how many points Goff cost the Lions. And it sucks. I don't really want to get into the hyperbole and the takes and all the people coming back with confirmation bias of look, it proves that they can't win with Jared Goff, all this stuff we saw online. People are really incapable of accepting that sometimes players who are normally really good on one individual day are bad. And it's one of the hardest things in sports to accept, but it happens sometimes. And I'm overall not really concerned because we've now seen Goff play 4 playoff games as a Lion, and in 3 of them he was superb. And in a different non-cursed world or a world with a better defense, he would have taken the Lions to the Super Bowl last year. So I don't have a concern. He just chose a really bad time for one of his 3 bad games on the season, 4 bad games out of 18. I mean, he was really good most weeks, and unfortunately, he wasn't in this one.
And another piece of confirmation bias from this game is there are certain individuals that of fan bases of other teams, particularly in the NFC North, perhaps wearing purple, that really loved to reinforce the JMO is the biggest doofus in the league narrative after this one. After his I saw posts that said Jameson Williams is a bigger idiot than George Pickens, which is a interesting debate to say the least. But obviously, JMO on the trick play, just not a great throw, not a great decision. Dan Campbell talked after the game and said that he thinks JMO should have just held on and tucked it and ran, maybe even slid down. Who knows? But that trick play in the fourth quarter, down 10. What were your thoughts on it?
Not a big fan. So there was definitely the line of argument of, well, you can't love the trick plays that work and hate the ones that don't. You have to commit to it. So here's my thing on that. First of all, the JMO end around is not a trick play. That's like the Lions run that a lot. End around or reverses, whatever you want to call that variety of play. That's not a trick play. I don't really honestly think that shovel pass play they ran is really a trick play under my definition of it. It's a neat wrinkle on a play is what I would call it. Where they pitch it to Monty and then he does the shovel pass forward to Amon-Ra. That was a neat play, a little bit different than this sort of trick play. My thing with this trick play is you just got to know when the time to do it is. And my answer is not, never in the playoffs because we've seen these work before. I mean, Antoine Randall standing on a sideline is the greatest example of a trick play in the Super Bowl of all places. So yeah, you can use it, but if I remember correctly, the Antoine Randall pass in the Super Bowl, I think they were up 14-10 and that made it 21-10. That's more the time you do it. You do it when you're ahead, you do it in a tie game, you do it early, not down 10 in the fourth quarter. That's the time to get serious. Like that is not the time in my opinion, to pull that out. But again, on Ben Johnson's behalf, it shouldn't have ended like that because when you rep that play, you do need to tell the receiver who's throwing the ball, if he's not open, don't throw it. Unfortunately, that doesn't always get communicated. We've seen it many times. I've watched football a long time. I've seen position players throwing get intercepted before. This wasn't the first time. A lot of times they get scared or they get freaked out. They're not used to that situation. All they're thinking is, I got to throw this ball. That's my job on this play. And they don't really know when to not throw it. But unfortunately, you just can't throw that ball. It wasn't open. And throw it away, slide down, whatever it is, you just can't throw it. And it's just, again, it's another really glaring error on a team that really made so few of them all year.
Yep. Now, before we flip over to the defense, I do want to focus on one positive that has been just a beacon of light all season. Jahmyr Gibbs, once again, awesome in this game. He had, I think, 176 total yards and a pair of touchdowns. I saw some people after the game comparing him to Jamal Charles, which, I mean, if Gibbs becomes Jamal Charles, that would be quite something. But he does have a similar athletic profile, so I guess the comp makes sense. But Gibbs all season has just been amazing. And Monty, I mean, he was fine in this game. He didn't see the field a whole lot. He probably was down around 30% of snaps, it felt like, especially in the fourth when they were trailing. But what are your thoughts on Gibbs and just how dynamic he's been over the last 2 months here?
He's been awesome, and he was awesome in this game. I put in my Substack piece about this game, which is about to be posted, a little bit of debate about Gibbs touches because I saw that online a bit. I saw on Sunday in particular people being like, "Wow, Saquon is what would happen if the Lions knew how to use Gibbs," and that kind of thing. Um, Honestly, I think going into next year, it's pretty clear who's the 1A and who's the 1B, sort of. But as the schedule moves along, you are going to, I think, still revolve around matchups to some degree, right? And when you're playing a softer opponent, which there aren't many on the schedule next year, but the ones that are on the schedule, I think that those are the games where you feature Monty a little bit more, or at least just cut down on the Gibbs touches to try and preserve his health. You don't want to run him into the ground, but definitely in the bigger games, Gibbs does need to start to really take on more of the feature role, and Montgomery more of the backup role, just because the gap has seemingly widened between the two. And in this game, it was wider than I hope it is next year, because I think Montgomery was not 100% in this game, didn't really look as sharp as he normally does, but Gibbs just so electrifying, and the big play potential every single time he touches it is undeniable, and that's a weapon the Lions are going to have to feature more and more as it goes along, especially in the biggest games, because he might be your best player on the field, and he probably was in this game. I thought Amon-Ra was really good in this game too. I had no issues with him. He did his job. I thought Laporta was fine to me. He had a spectacular touchdown catch. A number of players on offense were pretty solid. It just Goff had a poor day. There were some issues, in execution in a few places in high leverage moments, and then Graham Glasgow had a pretty bad day. That's the one other big negative in this game.
Did you have Graham's PFF grade from this one? Because I think what I saw was he had like a 72 run block grade and like a 30 something pass block.
I think it was lower than 30, but I don't have it up in front of me. It was quite ugly. There were some issues on rewatch, definitely not what we're discussing on this podcast, but you do have to wonder if that was his final game as a Lion. We'll get to that in future weeks, but it's one of those things where you look at this game overall, and the offense didn't do enough in the sense that it really needed to match Washington score for score, and it wasn't able to do so. On the other hand, they still gained 521 yards on 7.7 yards per play, and they scored 31 points, which in a lot of playoff games is going to win you the game. So I'm not really... We'll discuss Ben Johnson later leaving, but I'm not going to be like, this was the worst Ben Johnson game of all time or whatever. Like, the offense still played pretty darn well and got pretty good results, if not for a poor quarterback game. And ultimately, the reason they lost this game really was their defense was not healthy enough and not good enough with the remaining personnel it had to stop Jaden Daniels. And that's really ultimately the actual story.
Yep. And so final notes on the offense. Christian Mahogany looks like he is a very solid player and will probably be a starter next year at one of the guard spots. He had, I think, the second highest grade in this game behind Brian Branch. And aside from that, I will not listen to anyone who wants to try to blame this loss on Ben Johnson taking a coaching interview and being distracted. That is probably the stupidest take out there. Yeah.
We do have to give Teddy Bridgewater his flowers. That was he threw one pass, I think. I think he threw like a check down.
1 for 3 yards, and then
yeah.
3-play drive.
So 3-play drive, and not anything we really would have imagined but he was probably, unfortunately, I haven't looked at the underlying numbers, but I would assume he was probably the Lions' number one EPA per play quarterback in this game.
Actually, it might technically be Montgomery from the toss Tom
Yeah,
and
from the toss, yeah. But just thinking about those kids in Florida and their high school coach will be playing a playoff game in like a few weeks, right? Like you could
yeah.
just very, very funny story arc. And Bridgewater's a good guy, so nice to see him get a few snaps in a playoff game, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what if he's gonna retire again to go coach or what the deal is, but it was
He should just do that every year. Just go coach and then suit up for the playoffs. Then go coach and come back and suit up for the playoffs.
why not? Because until Hendon Hooker gets actual meaningful snaps, I don't think anyone wants him in a playoff game. So
Yeah, well, maybe Hendon Hooker's going to be traded to Chicago to replace Caleb Williams, but
well, before we get too conspiracy, let's flip over to the defense where not a lot went right in this game. They had one drive, one stop at the beginning of the game on what looked like a miscommunication on a QB sneak with Mariota in, and then after that, bad things.
yeah, I thought that play was supposed to be a shovel pass to
Mm.
Daniels. It looked like Mariota was supposed to fake sneak it and then turn and toss to Daniels, who was in the backfield. That was what I thought it looked like to me. Even if it wasn't going to work. Mariota never did shovel anything backwards, but the Lions penetrated into the backfield and got really right in that area very, very quickly. So it wasn't going to work either way. They got the stop there. Unfortunately, they were for Washington was 3 of 4 overall. After that, they were 3 for 3 on fourth down, and that doesn't even count the penalty fiasco. So the Lions in this game couldn't get stops in 2025. They could get stops in 1997, but unfortunately, the way Dan Quinn was coaching the game meant they had 4 plays to gain 10 yards in a lot of situations, and the Lions couldn't stop them on 4 plays and 10 yards, and give Dan Quinn credit for that. He is calling it correctly. It's worked for them all year, and it was too much for the Lions to manage in this game.
Yep. So to start off with, I think we should probably just talk about the like obviously Robertson going down affected a lot of things. Our favorite Kindle Vildor ended up having to play outside corner. Did have a nice pass break up on a 3rd and 10. We'll give him his flowers for that. But it just didn't seem like the Lions had a very good game plan to deal with the Commanders' offense because we know there are a few things that we know are true about Washington. Jaden Daniels is very good against the blitz, and they love to throw screens and underneath passes. And the Lions, for the life of them, could not figure those two things out.
Yeah, I will say on the topic of game planning, there's only so much game planning you can do when your players are bad or not playing well in particular. Because, like, I'm not just talking about the injuries, which were definitely a story in this game, but I didn't think a number of the healthy guys played very well. I thought it was a poor day from Reeder and Onwuzurike. They had issues defending the run between the tackles. I didn't think the linebackers were that great. There was several runs for Washington where they sat on the tackles, linebackers weren't in the gaps, and they were ripping off 10-yard chunks, 15-yard chunks. Right after the JMO pick, Brian Robinson has that long run. I think it was him. Was it Eckler? I don't remember who it was, but they got a long chunk right after that, 20, 30 yards. That's not something we've seen from the Lions much this year. And that was happening in addition to the fact that everything else was so depleted. So when those guys aren't playing very well and then you're down to the bone elsewhere, there's only so much you can do from a game planning standpoint. I mean, they couldn't really get a 4-man rush going. When they tried to throw a blitz at Daniels, it wasn't super effective because we know he's been good at that. They didn't really cover many people. I mean, this was pretty poor, but not that out of line compared to some games we saw against San Francisco, against Buffalo, against even to some degree in Chicago in the second half on Thanksgiving. We're really able to move the ball. So I don't know how much of it is X's and O's and how much of it is talent, but it was just a bad day all around.
The ground game was the most frustrating for me because since their week 14 bye, the Commanders had been averaging about 101 rushing yards as a team per game, but that also includes the Jaden Daniels effect. Their running backs had been averaging just 2.94 yards per carry since their week 14 bye, including the wild card game. And they rushed for over 200 yards or just under 200 yards against the Lions. Yeah, unacceptable. Just can't have it, especially when you have DJ Rader, who's supposed to be one of the best run stuffing nose tackles in the league. Anzalone and Campbell are playing. They are supposed to be good against the run. Josh Pascal's a very good run defender, usually. It fell apart at the worst time.
Yeah, and even despite all of the yards Washington piled up, as we mentioned, they got Washington into a few very important fourth down situations. And if you're
Yep.
able to get one or two stops on those outside of the one you already got, maybe you win the game. You don't have to stop them all the time. Just get the ones when it matters. And they had some opportunities there. They have that play where I think it was a 4th and 2 around the 20-yard line. I said to my dad and the other people in the room we were watching, I'm thinking play action, give Daniels a run option. Exactly what happens. Play action, bootleg, and he picks up the first down because Terrion Arnold bites on the play action. You kind of, watching that play, really had to remember the personnel problems because you may recall the Arizona Cardinals called that pretty much exact same play against the Lions in Week 3 with Kyler Murray. And you remember it was Carlton Davis, the third, who sniffed it out and made a great play to stop Kyler short of the sticks. Gotta wonder if Carlton Davis was available, would he have snuffed that out, right? Those are the things that really haunt you. And then they had a couple other in the red zone that they were able to pass. They ran mesh on one and just got it wide open. Even then, and even they had third down conversions. I know at least one of the, well, there was a penalty in the end zone on a 3rd and goal, I believe. That was on Kirby Joseph. They also scored a touchdown on a 3rd and goal from the 5 to Zach Ertz against Melifonwu. There were a lot of situations where the Lions could get into 3rd and 4th downs and then just couldn't make that final stop. And it's a big bummer, but they had opportunities, they just couldn't pull it off, and for a number of reasons, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, overall, it's tough because there's not a whole lot to break down with the defense. It just wasn't good enough. But we kind of expected that, and if if they were healthy, maybe things go differently. But if ifs and buts
Well,
were candy and nuts, they would have won a Super Bowl last year.
yeah, and I thought watching I just went through the highlights over again. Branch was probably their best defensive player. He was
I don't think
fine.
he wasn't as good as his PFF grade indicated.
No, I definitely disagreed with that grade, but I did think he had a few solid moments in this game. Otherwise, Kirby got called for that flag. I thought was a little on the borderline, but whatever. He got beat on the Denami Brown deep ball, which was just, it was really good coverage.
Yeah.
He made it really tough, and Daniels dropped it in there. There's not too much you can be furious about on that one. And beyond that, I really didn't have many other players I liked in this game. And the McLaurin screen pass does deserve further mention. Atrocious play call from Aaron Glenn on that play. You are handing them a touchdown on what you called. So you have your 3v2 to the top. You've got 3 wide receivers at the top and only 2 corners. You've got the deep safety, Kirby Joseph, shaded to the opposite side, and then you've got your nickel and the linebacker, the near side linebacker. Those are your 2 options to help, and he blitzes both of them. And Washington is just like, wow, we'll throw to the side of the field where there are 3 of our guys and 2 of your guys. And it's just a do or die play. I think it was Vildor and Melifonwu were over on that side, and they had to make the stop right there. And if they didn't, it was going to be a game over, and it was game over. They didn't make the play, but that's just a really reckless blitz where the numbers weren't on your side, and Kingsbury won the chess match there against Glenn, and it was really just a devastating play. And again, just a high leverage coaching blunder, and we haven't had a lot of those this year.
Yeah, and look, that'll be that was like the definition of win by doing nothing. The Commanders were just like, okay, and McLaurin had to just run in a straight line. Didn't really face much resistance. Kirby almost caught up to him, but it just was horrible. There's no other way to say it. It was just horrible. And I think with that, if you don't have any other notes on the personnel, we should talk about the coaching staff in general. Now, 4th and 2, 12 men on the field. Where does that rank in terms of coaching blunders in the Dan Campbell era?
It's right near the top. I remember there was something in that first Thanksgiving game. Was it a timeout usage or they
Double
called a timeout?
timeout.
They double timeout. That's what it was. Um, Outside of that, there really haven't been many of them. I mean, I'm just thinking about this year when I was looking at it, and the 12 men play uh, issue in this game. The only one that came to mind this whole season that was roughly equivalent was the fiasco at the end of the first half against Tampa Bay, where they didn't get the field goal
Right.
team out, remember? And it cost them 3 really consequential points. That was like really the only one that I could remember this season that was that sort of thing. We just don't see that kind of stuff. And to not be able to get the timeout in with 12 players on the field on a fourth down is just probably the worst moment of the entire Campbell era. Certainly, scaling for um, stakes and lever and all that stuff being in the playoffs.
Yeah, and look, that obviously coming at a high leverage play on a 4th and 2, that just it gifted the Commanders points and didn't like they didn't even have to try. So that obviously sucked. And then on the whole, we've kind of talked about it here and there, but what were your overall thoughts of the coaching in this game?
I thought that Campbell did the right thing in coming out and taking the fall for the players and saying I didn't have them ready to play. I didn't think that was really the issue in this game, honestly. Again, I thought they had a fine offensive game plan. Some things intervened that got them out of the game state they wanted to be in. Maybe the defensive coaching could have been better, but that feels, again, in some ways tied to Aaron Glenn related things and some of the issues we've seen as defenses when they don't have talent have. Like that, to me, was part of my reaction to this game as a Lions fan versus the national discourse, where we're coming out of this game and all these national writers are saying things like, "Oh, this is the greatest rookie quarterback of all time," and he might be. I'm not here to denigrate Jaden Daniels. Like he played great, but I'm sitting here as a Lions fan being like, I watch Geno Smith do this to our defense once a year. I'm not impressed. Like we've seen this issue happen for good. We have seen there have been games over the years where the defense just looks awful and they
Yeah.
really can't stop anything for 60 straight minutes. And it was one of those games in this one. So who you put that on the shoulders of, I don't really know, but it wasn't really an out of character thing the way some of the other issues in this game were. The biggest coaching issue is that 12 men play. And I don't really fault them necessarily for being in a situation where 12 players were on the field, with the caveat being that I am taking into account the situation they were in this game, right? Where Branch goes down, Melifonwu goes down. The two players, if I am correct here, I believe were Morris Norris and Stanley Thomas Oliver III, I believe were their two names. One of them was not supposed to be out there. They were number 38 and number 40. I was sitting there right before that play happened, looking at those two guys, and I said out loud, "Who the hell is 38?" Like, I was like, I've never seen this guy before. And I went back and looked it up. One of the two guys played one snap against Minnesota, and the other one had not played any snaps the entire season on defense. Like, these are guys that are practice squad players who have never been seen before. And those familiar with hockey will know that if you have injuries during a game or the coach is scrambling the lines a lot, you're more likely to get too many men on the ice call, just because anytime you get your players out of the routine, out of a structure where they know what they're supposed to be doing, you're more likely to have mistakes. And in this situation, bringing players onto the field who have never been on the field before the entire season, I understand that given those extenuating circumstances, you were probably going to have one play in this game where someone was out there where they weren't supposed to be. And if that happens, though, the coach has got to get a timeout in. And you could tell on the sideline, the positional coaches were going crazy. You could see the players on the field were freaking out. there was, I think, enough time to get one in. It certainly seemed like there was, and they didn't get it. I wonder if it was Dan not wanting to use timeouts on defense, knowing the situation his team was in. We've seen him be very strict on that before, which I get, but you have to adjust to the situation. As much as it sucks to use a timeout on defense, you just have to. You just have to. That was a huge moment in the game, and it definitely cost him. It didn't cost him as badly as Goff's interceptions, but I don't know. It's it's just one of those games where we had the one of the worst Goff games of the year at the same time as one of the worst defensive games of the year at the same time as the worst Campbell coaching blunder of the year, and all those things conspired for this catastrophe.
Which, to bring up another point, everything has fallen apart at the exact same time in the Lions' last game of the season 2 years in a row. Against the Niners in the second half, everything went wrong all at once. And obviously, in this game, a lot of things piled up to combine to create a multi-score loss at home in the divisional round. Is there any level of concern that the Lions have had similar issues with everything falling apart all at once, both in the playoffs this year and last year, as well as just in losses in the past, some of those Seahawks games, for example, and just that the calamity of eras, and it's the opposite of complementary football?
Not, I'm not too concerned. Like, honestly, the defensive stuff is its own conversation, and that's Glenn related. Glenn's not here anymore. We'll talk about it with discussion of the replacements, but I was never a big fan of the fact that every so often his defense would look like the worst defense ever constructed. I generally don't think that's a good thing to have happen from time to time, but I kind of differentiate this from the Niners game in that the Niners game felt like black magic taking over, right? Like this game felt more like, wow, we were just bad. And the Niners game felt like there are supernatural forces involved here. Players that don't fumble putting the ball on the ground. The Vildor play in and of itself is something you can't even begin to script. Like, that game just felt like a revenge with the Reynolds drops and everything else. It just felt like a revenge of the same old Lions and curse of Bobby Lane and whatever you want to call it. This just felt like a sloppy game. And I'm not... What I feel like is that it will raise the level of alarm going into next year's playoffs, and that if there is a similar game to this one next year, then we'll have to have a discussion. But overall, I'm not that concerned because I don't really feel like this game is that different from the game against Minnesota a few weeks ago. Like, I think the team took that one very seriously. They treated it like a playoff game. They said it's for NFC North. Everything was on the line, and they played a really nice game in that one. And everything was on the line against the Rams, and everything was on the line against the Buccaneers last year in the playoffs. So it's that issue of just how do we take into account one game where things go wrong. And obviously, it's frustrating to have those losses in the playoffs, but then again, as we know from the Packers example, if you lose in the playoffs, you're going to have bad things happen because you lost the game.
Mm-hmm. Which is fair. And look, it's not to say the reactionary response that I was having immediately after the game is that the Lions were quickly becoming playoff chokers. And look, as you say, that's the type of thing where if it happens once, it's a fluke. It happens twice, it's worth noting, but not something to necessarily be too concerned with. If it happens 3 times, it's a trend. So we'll just have to see how of course, they have to get to the playoffs next year, which there's a lot that has to happen between now and then. That's a year away. So we'll talk about all that over the course of the year. But as it pertains to this game, do you have any other notes before we move on to some of the other news that's happened in the last 48 hours?
Yeah, I do want to just sort of wrap it up and say that building off that point about something going wrong, these things happen in NFL history and in the history of other leagues, that every couple years in the NFL, sometimes a few years in a row, there is a team that gets a bye, especially back in the old days when we had 2 byes per conference, that you watch the whole season and you're like, wow, this team rocks. They're really good. I think they're going to go to the Super Bowl. And then the playoff game starts and they get punked at home. And there's a lot of those games over the years. I remember a number of them as a kid. Tennessee in 2008 was 13-3 with Jim Schwartz's vaunted defense, and then boom, they lost in the divisional to Joe Flacco and the rookie Joe Flacco and the Ravens. And you had Aaron Rodgers losing at home as a 15-1 team to Eli Manning, and not just losing, but getting kind of blown out in the second half of that game. And the year that Green Bay won the Super Bowl, they went into Atlanta, who I believe was 13-3 that year. They were the number 1 seed, and they just blew them right out of the Georgia Dome. Like this, I mean, all the way up to Baltimore getting blown out by Tennessee a few years ago when they seemed like one of the greatest teams of all time in the regular season. This stuff does happen sometimes, and we've never had it happen to our team before, but we can now say it sucks. And it's not about that it happens. It's about how you respond. And you can take the example of the 2005 Indianapolis Colts, who had lost the previous 2 years to Tom Brady and the Patriots. They couldn't get over that hump. Then in 2005, they have a great team. They were right at the top of the league in offense, right in the top of the league in defense. Number 1 seed, 14-2 record. The Patriots lose on the Saturday of the divisional round to Denver. Suddenly, the red carpet is right there, the path to the Super Bowl. All you got to do is win 2 games at home. And they got beat by the Steelers. And they were down 21-3 in the fourth quarter of that game before a late comeback attempt that fell short. And probably if you were doing a show called, I don't know, Colts Talk in 2005, 2006, you would have said these guys are chokers and it's never going to happen. And then the very next season, they had a worse regular season record, worse seed, won 3 games, beat New England in the AFC title game, went to the Super Bowl, beat the Bears, won the championship. Like, it just... that's the positive inspiration, but it's the case that stuff has happened plenty of times before. It's not that it happened one time. It's how you respond. And that's what the story for this franchise will be moving forward. Fans of this show who are Red Wings fans, which is probably a lot of listeners, if you were old enough to remember the 90s, there were a lot of painful moments, a lot of heartbreak for the Red Wings before they finally got over the hump in 1997. So we'll just see how the team responds to it moving forward.
Yeah, and look, that's the gift and the curse of sports, right? There can only be one winner, so it's more than likely not going to be you. And it's just all it's going to take is one good playoff run to unwrite any. The Lions could lose in the playoffs for the next 5 years. One Super Bowl undoes a lot of those narratives, right? And I guess the flip side of that is, would you rather be the Lions who just had a stinker of a game and lose to the Commanders, or would you rather be the Baltimore Ravens who lose to the Bills on a dropped 2-point conversion?
After having blown several great chances to make the Super Bowl in prior seasons.
Yep.
We talk about Baltimore as a model organization, and they are in a lot of ways, but it's not all jolly for Ravens fans either. So it's, unless you are a Patriots fan or a Chiefs fan, it don't come easy in this league, and to some degree, we still have to just be thankful that we got a lot of fun weeks before the hammer dropped, I guess.
And that is the weird aspect, is the Lions won more games than they did all of last year, including the playoffs, and yet they didn't go as far.
Well, and honestly, that is the thing to me that I would say is probably the most remarkable thing about this season is, and I said this to my dad and my brother after the game, was it's the regular season record that was the most incongruent thing about this season, because they were an injury team. Just kind of frankly, they were an injury team. It struck more later in the year, but generally there's a few teams every year that injuries just kind of wreck them. And most of the time when that happens, they majorly underachieve. And we have a great example of that being the San Francisco 49ers. And so usually that's the way it goes, that you just kind of fizzle out in the regular season, maybe make the playoffs, maybe you don't. Remember the year the Ravens had Lamar was like injured going into the playoffs, and they were just kind of a joke going into Cincinnati. Like, that's generally how it goes. And if you told me before the season that the situation with Hutchinson was going to be what it was, with the defense disintegrating later on, the fact they were playing a pretty tough first place schedule, I would have been like, honestly, let's just make the playoffs. Like that, if you had told me all that before the season, that would have been my expectation. Like,
Yeah.
let's just get in and see if we can give ourselves a chance. And instead, somehow they became one of 9 teams to ever win 15 games. Like, it's just completely ridiculous. They got this crazy injury season, but then paired it with really high expectations, and it was probably an unfortunate conundrum that an unfortunate kind of combination of factors. And it honestly was the great story of this season to me is that I week by week we just kept seeing the Lions win games, and yet I'd sit down during the week later in the season and look at this roster. I'm just like, how is this happening? How are they winning these games? And maybe it did catch up to them in the end.
Well, and I think it also just speaks to how good this coaching staff was all year to be able to elevate the talent all season. They have one of the better point differentials in the
Yeah,
Super Bowl era. They look, despite the injuries, they were a great team. And I think that's what sucks the most about it is the injuries completely ruined their ability to go on a championship run, but also they kind of just got in their own way, didn't play their best, and it happens. So that
yeah.
it gives you a lot of optimism for the future because when the team is presumably a bit healthier, you have another draft class coming in, and you have some money to work with in free agency. The roster should theoretically be better, and you talked to me about this offline. Next year, despite the tougher schedule, there is a good chance the Lions have a worse record but are a better team.
That is quite possible. And it is a shame about the injuries because I think if you give last year's injury luck to this team, which was overall pretty good, like they missed CJ Gardner-Johnson for a lot of the year, then he came back for the playoffs. I mean, Laporta had that scare in week 18 against the Vikings, but was ultimately fine. Like they were fine, and most teams are fine. You look at these teams playing this weekend,
Mhm.
most of them look like what you expect them to look like. There's, a few guys. Oh, everyone has a few guys that get injured, but
Mhm.
nothing like the Lions. And Bill Barnwell tweeted out that picture of the depth chart with all the lines crossed out on defense. If you give last year's injury luck to this year's team, I feel pretty confident they would be hosting the NFC Championship game this weekend, and we would be feeling really good about it. And that's what
Ugh.
sucks.
Is the
But
Eagles look so beatable? uh, oh well. It is what it is. It just
that's
sucks.
that's that's our symbolic final note on the season is that long sigh.
So, with that being said, less than 48 hours after the loss, it was announced that Ben Johnson would become the new head coach of our rival Chicago Bears. This comes after weeks of rumors that he was being linked to the Raiders and that he was going to go to Las Vegas and do something. I don't know. The Raiders are not a very desirable spot. It has also been reported, or sorry, rumored that he turned down the Jaguars position because the ownership situation is rather interesting, as we talked about with the destinations that still have head coach vacancies. But Ben Johnson ends up in Chicago. How do we feel about it?
I'm feeling conflicted about it. What I am feeling about it is annoyed at some elements of the discourse online, as I often am about things, but I dislike the tendency of certain people who blog about the team and cover the team sort of from a fan perspective. So people that are roughly colleagues of ours, but maybe not quite in that vein, that sort of take to the internet to sort of chastise and talk down to fans and tell them what they are and are not allowed to be feeling about things. And I don't really know why there is the tendency to do that. I just don't think that's uh I don't know. To me that's just not not appropriate. Like people are allowed to feel what they want to feel. And obviously if people are feeling something and expressing something completely illogical like we're blaming Jake Bates for the loss to Washington. Like okay, obviously that's right, like something that just plainly doesn't make sense. Sure. But the this situation with Johnson, I have real no real issue with fans feeling upset about it. And it's very clear that fans were not feeling upset that he left, and I think there was some willful ignorance among certain people online being like, you can't be mad at him for taking a head coaching job. It's like, that's not why people are mad. Like, let's stop playing dumb. People are mad that he took a job with a rival organization, with a rival team, and I think if he had decided to go to Las Vegas, like you mentioned, there would be a few people dunking on him and still doing the, oh, should have spent more time game planning, right? Like there would still be that, but it would die out pretty quickly. And this will not die out quickly. People will probably boo him when he comes back to Ford Field, and that's fine. I don't have an issue with it. Like, to me, he is making a decision to go to a team in the division and risking what that is going to mean for fan perception, and he has every right to do that. If he thinks that's the best job choice for him, go for it. But you got to know that people are going to be upset. And if I were him, I would kind of want that to be the case. Like, if he doesn't know that Chicago is a division rival, if he doesn't know people are going to be upset, he's going to fail at that job, right? Like, that's the first
Yeah.
thing you got to know is who the rivals are. And so people are allowed to feel what they want to feel, and there is going to be a little bit of a betrayal involved in the feeling, and that's totally fine. People put their time and money and hearts and energy into this team, and it all just fell apart. And then right after that, the guy says, "I'm going to a rival team." Obviously, people are going to be mad, and it's totally fine. The whole line about, you can't be mad at him. He's just doing what's right for his family. Like that line of argument followed to its conclusion essentially reasons that we can never be mad about anyone doing anything because as long as they think it's right for them, we can't have an opinion.
Yeah.
No, we have an opinion. Like, best of luck to Ben Johnson so much as his interests don't conflict with our interests. By choosing a team in the division, his interests conflict with our interests. So we will root against him and hope he fails. Sorry, Ben.
Well,
If you wanted us on your side, should have picked the Raiders.
that's the whole point of being a fan, is to cheer
Yeah.
against your rivals and to cheer
Yeah,
for the, like,
exactly.
it's so stupid to, I don't know, to think that fans just aren't allowed to express themselves. Like, that's the whole point of being a fan and liking sports, is to express how you feel about your favorite team.
Yeah, and going down this line of argument again is like basically coming to the conclusion that we shouldn't cheer against teams. We shouldn't cheer against people. We should no. That's what makes sports great. People love
Yeah.
watching that. People love hate watching. That's what we were. That's what we live on. Like, people want to watch the Bills and the Chiefs. Who's got a bit of a rivalry now, right? I mean, everyone's gonna hate watch Kansas City for the rest of time after this weekend and after all of the years. Like, that's what draws in ratings. People want to watch Michigan and Ohio State. They want to watch Alabama and Auburn. They want to watch the Red Sox and the Yankees or the Leafs and the Habs. Like, that's what sports revolve around. And now we're going to get fun storylines. And the television people that rule the world are going to love this. They are going to love if Ben Johnson gets a decent team in Chicago and they get to put that game on Monday night and Sunday night and play up the Campbell versus Johnson stuff. It's going to be a big storyline. And that's totally fine. And he's got to know that. And I assume he's fine with it. And we'll see how it goes. I'm curious to see how he does. He never really showed the sort of like Campbell Glenn like people person personification in public in Detroit. So I'm curious to see how that goes in a new place. But obviously we've seen Kevin O'Connell be a fairly stoic kind of guy and have a good staff in Minnesota. So
Kyle
maybe it'll
Shanahan.
work. Sure, maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, so first of all, just as a prediction, I would be willing to wager that the Lions and Bears games will both be nationally televised next year. I'm willing to bet that the Lions will host the Bears on Thanksgiving, and the game in Chicago will be some sort of primetime affair because storylines and the NFL and the Lions were the most watched team in the NFL this season. They were on a lot of in a lot of primetime games, and people I don't know, people still like watching the Lions. So I'd be willing to wager that involves some Bears action next year. As for Johnson, look, he had a very good 3-year run as offensive coordinator. He was very influential as the pass game coordinator in the second half of 2021 as well, when Dan Campbell himself was calling the plays. He has been instrumental in reviving Jared Goff's career, but I am also not going to sit here and say he is the only reason for their success. There was a lot of, let's say, non Lions fans and non Lions reporters that were talking about Ben Johnson as if he is the only reason the Lions offense is good, which is very ignorant to say the least. But this is, I think it's fair to say that this is going to be a much bigger deal for the Bears and for Caleb Williams than it will be for the Lions. Not in the sense that it won't be a downgrade, because obviously losing one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, you're going to have a little bit of regression. That being said, the Lions should absolutely still be a top 8, top 10 unit next year, just because they have so much talent, and there's going to be some continuity with the, I guess, expected promotion of someone within the organization, and whether that's Engstrand or Scotty Montgomery, someone else, I don't know, Mark Brunell, potentially, you would expect that a lot of the philosophies would stay in place. And with that and all the talent, you should be able to find some success. I think it'll be a much bigger deal for Caleb Williams because he is now going to have an offense completely tailored to his strengths. And ideally, Ben Johnson will stay there for multiple seasons, which would allow him to develop properly, which is something Chicago has failed to do at the quarterback position forever. So we'll see what happens there. There are some exciting young pieces. I did see a funny meme that as soon as Ben Johnson lands in Chicago, the first thing he's going to do is toss DeAndre Swift off a bridge. But no, like it'll be. If you're a Bears fan, you should be excited because you're getting a very creative offensive mind. And at the end of the day, the whole point of the Bears rebuild is to hopefully have Caleb Williams develop into a superstar quarterback. This is a step in that direction. You obviously have to keep investing in the offensive line and the weapons to make his life easier, but we'll see. I think the bigger question is what Ben Johnson will do with the rest of his staff. We had talked about, and I had mentioned to you offline, I thought he needed to have a defensive coordinator who had previous head coach experience because, as we talked about, the difference between the Vikings and Packers, for example, being Brian Flores, a very stable influence at the defensive coordinator spot, compared to what Matt LaFleur is working with in Green Bay. I think that will work wonders for Ben Johnson what Dennis Allen is the rumored name. I think that would be a good hire because Dennis Allen, while he was not a great head coach, proved he was a pretty good defensive coordinator. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, and that was a guy we kind of wondered about with the Lions potentially to replace Aaron Glenn if that comes to pass. But yeah, with Ben Johnson, I definitely always felt that he had very ridiculous PR among the league's rep. Like, just some of the ways that it was talked about, where people said things like, commonly accepted offensive genius, Ben Johnson, and things of that nature that were said. I'm like, commonly accepted, like, what? I get that we think he is a smart young coach or whatever, but I've always said that you don't get the offensive genius label until you're somebody who does it at a bunch of places, like the Kyle Shanahan thing, right? Like, once you've gone to several teams and you've had many different offenses with many different quarterbacks and many different players and had consistently great offenses, then we can use those kinds of labels. But for Ben Johnson, who knows? Maybe he is the next Kyle Shanahan. Maybe he's the next Mike Martz, who was the greatest show on turf guy with the Rams back in the day. And as we always say, you are kind of tied to your weapons, and how he develops weapons, how he develops quarterbacks, all that will have a big influence in what happens. I will remember him in Detroit as a seemingly smart young guy who built a solid offense to suit the weapons. The weapons were elite, and as a result, the production was elite. Did about what I expected out of him. Good job. Sometimes he would make, generally each game, 2 to 3 infuriating things where he'd outsmart himself and get too cute. Otherwise, I generally liked what he did. So he earned a job, and we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yep. Now moving on to the other side of the ball, Aaron Glenn has gotten a lot of head coaching buzz. Now, the report today was that he was going to his in person interview with the Jets, and the goal of the Jets was to not let him leave the building without a deal. That did not come to pass. Aaron Glenn has landed at. As of recording this, this report came out 20 minutes ago that Aaron Glenn
Yeah.
is back in Detroit, and the it's basically balls in his court. There is a contract offer on the table, and it's his job if he wants it. I wonder if he's going to wait to meet with the Saints first because that interview got delayed by a couple of days. We'll see, but it seems very, very likely that Aaron Glenn is also on his way out.
Yep. And Dan Campbell said as much at his press conference that he expects both guys to move along. If I'm Glenn, I kind of probably prefer the Saints job. It's so hard to figure out. Those
I
two are both
is Aaron
bad
Rodgers
jobs.
involved if you're a Jets?
Well, and the Jets have ownership and issues that have persisted for many, many years now that are prohibitively negative. And obviously, you would be in division with a pretty good quarterback in Josh Allen, a team in Miami that has been pretty solid over the last few years. You got a team in New England that made a seemingly decent head coach hire, has a rookie quarterback who had a pretty nice first year. Like, you're number 4 on the totem pole there, and you're kind of the number 4 on the totem pole in New Orleans as well, but not as tough of a division generally speaking. The bar to entry in the playoffs is much lower. I think I would prefer the New Orleans job, but up to him to pick. But it certainly seems like he will pick one of the two.
Yeah, I think I'd prefer the Jets job just with the caveat that if Aaron Rodgers is gone, I would want I would want no part in dealing with that. But let's say Aaron Rodgers is gone. Let's say Devontae Adams is gone. I don't know, and you just are stuck with the young pieces that are on that roster. I think it's workable. Garrett Wilson, great young receiver on the offensive side of the ball. You have some really good defensive pieces. I think Aaron Glenn could make a lot of good things happen defensively. Whether or not it stands up to Josh Allen, well, probably not, because not a lot of people can stand up to Josh Allen. But I don't know. It's gonna be a longer rebuild if you go to the Saints because of their ridiculous cap issues every year. That being said, Glenn was the DB's coach in New Orleans for a long time. He interviewed for that head coaching job the same time Dennis Allen got it, so it seems like there is a very familiar connection there. And I wouldn't be shocked if he went there, but it does seem like the Jets really, really want him. Now,
Well,
as for
it's
oh yeah, good.
it's two sides of his life, right? Like, it's the team he played for at his peak with, or the team that he coached with outside the Lions, right? Like,
Yep.
it's picking between his coach life in New Orleans or his playing life in the Jets, and both have connections to him. See which one wins out, I guess.
Yep, he was also a college area scout for 2 years with the Jets after he ended his playing career before he started coaching. So there's that as well. We'll see. As for his staff, it sounds like Clint Kubiak was one of his offensive coordinator choices. Another name, Mark Brunell, who we just mentioned a couple of minutes ago for as a potential replacement for Ben Johnson. I think Glenn. The other name is Kelvin Shepard. If he doesn't get promoted in Detroit, he would be a defensive coordinator candidate around the league, not just in Detroit. There was a report that said Glenn was looking for a veteran, like former head coach, defensive coordinator. Which it's becoming a trend in the NFL where teams really covet a former head coach that could be a coordinator for them because the prospect of teams not interviewing them in the future based on their head coach track record would allow you to keep them for longer. So I don't know. It'll be very well. We know more about what Ben Johnson wants to do at this point because he's already been hired, but we'll find out more in the coming days for both these guys, I think.
Yeah, I think these two guys. It's going to be a tumultuous time for the Lions coaching staff in general because you've got other people interviewing for coordinator jobs, both on the staffs of Johnson and Glenn. as well as for other teams. Hank Fraley had interviews in Seattle, and the defensive line coach is having interviews potentially in New England for DC. And there's not really a lot the Lions can do about those because unless you promote them, you can't really stop it. So it's gonna potentially be kind of a full rebuild of the staff, but that's where Dan Campbell has to do his job, and he did a good job building this staff, and I have belief he'll probably do a good job building a new staff, and he's just got to do it. And I'll be curious to see which ways he goes. The plus side of it is if your staff gets rated, those vacancies are going to be highly desirable because other young coaches around the league are going to say, hey, these were stepping stones to coordinator and head coaching jobs. I want to take these jobs. Like whether they go in-house for the new OC, for example, or with someone else or whatever direction they go, that's an extremely desirable job. To step into an offense that was just extremely good, that has all these players, has so much familiarity, you just can step in and keep the car on the road. That's something anyone will want to do. Let's say if Hank Fraley leaves, I get to go coach, Sewell and Ragnow and Decker. Like all these jobs are really desirable. Lions have a lot of great players. They expect to win a lot of games, and they've just promoted a whole wave of coaches into high-profile roles in the NFL, and that will allow them to keep the talent pool fresh. That's why good organizations stay good, as they attract talent, develop talent, and then get the next wave in.
Yep. So with these vacancies, we'll start on the offensive side. Do you have, I guess for both of them, would you rather stay in-house or would you rather go with an outside hire?
I'd rather stay in-house on offense and I'd go outside on defense. That's my personal take. I think the success the offense has had, I would want to just preserve that. I don't have, honestly, looking at it, a lot of feeling like, wow, there's something that was really wrong with Ben Johnson's approach that, didn't work and we need to fix this out of house. Defensively, I would like someone ideally who can install some more zone a little more. Like they're going to be a base man team. Campbell iterated that. I'm not a big fan of that, but that's their choice, and it's from the top down. But they need to have a little more of a zone changeup to go to, which they never really had under Glenn. They had periods where they tried to do it more. It never really succeeded in much. And I just like them to have a few more sort of schematic answers for when they don't have great talent, right? Like when this defense is at full strength, it will probably be really good because they've got a lot of really good players, and that was going to be the case under Glenn if they had been able to keep Hutchinson healthy and Davis, etc. But I want a few more solutions for situations like in this playoff game where you're really depleted and can elevate limited talent a little more. So that would be my preference. But if they go in-house, it's probably not the end of the world. That's just my take. Where are you standing on it?
I think I'm a little bit more inclined to stay in-house on both of them, just because it seems like, well, on offense there's been two guys. Scotty Montgomery almost like he was almost an OC, I think somewhere else in the league, and he is a hot candidate. And then Engstrand obviously would be a similar vein to Ben Johnson, where not necessarily the hype man that Montgomery is or that Campbell is, Aaron Glenn is, whatever, but he definitely is more of the younger creative coach. So we'll see what happens there. Defensively, I think I'd give Shepard a chance. It seems like he's being groomed for that role for a number of years at this point, and I would be kind of surprised if he was not a defensive coordinator next season, whether it's with the Lions or with one of Johnson or Glenn's staffs.
Yeah, that's fair. I as much as I have an inclination, again, I'm going to trust Dan Campbell. He built the
Yep.
staff. He had a lot of success with this group, and it's on him to reload it and keep rebuilding. And if you're a great coach, that's what you do. I mean, Nick Saban, college football all those years, had the greatest coaching tree there ever was, and he'd lose a bunch of guys to go be successful head coaches elsewhere, and he'd just bring in new guys and it keep humming along. That's what you do if you're a great head coach, and it's on Campbell to do that.
Yep. So, with that being said, I think that's it for the Lions related stuff. Going into conference championship weekend, two games: Bills, Chiefs, Commanders, Eagles. I'll probably keep this brief, but what are you looking for in these two matchups?
Well, the Eagles Commanders one, you obviously have a big underdog narrative. You have what is the line in that game? I actually haven't looked it up. I've been
I'll
kind
check.
of avoiding
Yeah, me too.
thinking about those games. I
Eagles are
see.
6 points favorites.
Man, that feels a little generous to Washington to me, but Eagles haven't looked super sharp, I guess, and probably hurts questions. My concern in this game is just the fact that I watched most of the two previous matchups between these teams, and it didn't really feel super competitive to me when both teams were at full strength. Like that first game, Eagles really throttled Washington. Second game, Washington had more success, but the Eagles played almost all that game with Kenny Pickett, and it still required Commanders to pull it kind of out of their ass at home to win that game. And this one's in Philadelphia. Hurts should play. Washington's got they've got the team of destiny vibes. I get all that. I also watched them really struggle against Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon, and the Eagles' defense is a lot better than the Lions' injured defense. I just don't feel great about it for Washington, but hey, maybe it happens. That's my take on that one.
Yeah, I fully expect the Eagles to probably win this game and also probably lose in the Super Bowl because,
That's my
man,
feeling.
the Eagles' pass game looks so pedestrian. Like they're the flying Saquon Barkleys, and
Yep.
that's taken them very far. They obviously that's not giving enough credit to their defense, which is Jalen Carter is a monster. They have some really good corners. And our old friend C.J. Gardner Johnson is there as well. They have a good defense, but it's hard to envision a world where this version of Jalen Hurts is gonna walk into the Super Bowl and outduel either Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, that very much was my feeling watching this weekend's games. The KC Buffalo one, I don't know.
Please, please, I'm begging you, Buffalo.
This is a very if the Bills don't do it, then next week we all have to do the Obi-Wan like you were the chosen one thing for Josh Allen because man, if it ever feels like there was a time, it's got to be this one, and it's I guess Chiefs -2 indicates Bills won on a neutral field. The Bills won that previous matchup, which was obviously in Buffalo. The playoff Chiefs are the biggest boogeyman in all of the league. Something has to break the curse, but just even watching playoffs Chiefs this weekend against the Texans, they really didn't impress me. The Texans shot themselves in the foot repeatedly. They handed over how many points on special teams? They handed over points because they just had some of the most bizarre protection assignments that
Yep.
I've ever
Oh,
seen that were just terrible. And that Texans team isn't very good. And this Bills team is probably a little overrated, but they're being dragged by Josh Allen, and that might be enough. It might well be enough. It was enough the first time these two teams met, and Buffalo won the game by 9 points. They outgained them. They outgained them on a yards per play basis. They just got to replicate it. They are, 0-2 against KC in the playoffs? Third time's the
uh,
charm.
well, we'll see. If that divisional round a few years ago wasn't enough, surely we can figure something. I don't know. What? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. I will say the Texans, that game was chalked for me the second that there was the kind of phantom roughing the passer, and the next play Travis Kelsey catches like a 35
Oh,
yard
yeah.
pass. The second that happened, I'm like, yeah, yep, that's game. And then there was the really weird unnecessary roughness after Mahomes ran for like 15 yards, except the Texans players hit each other. They didn't even hit Mahomes. Very weird. So hopefully there's no ref ball in this game. But yeah, the entire world is begging the Buffalo Bills to just save us.
We need the Bills to win that game so badly. Everyone needs it, and hopefully they bring it home. There's no story that wouldn't unite the NFL world like the Bills, the good, never hurt anyone sort of team taking down the evil Chiefs. Hopefully it happens. Everyone will be dialed in. The ratings for that game is going to be crazy. And I would enjoy an Eagles-Bills Super Bowl. I think it would have some fun storylines. I think the Bills would be favored, but the Bills' run defense against Saquon is definitely an area of concern. I would really enjoy that. It would cleanse our palate. KC, Philly,
I
I,
joked with some
doing
friends
it
at this.
again, like, oh, come on.
I joked with some friends at the start of the playoffs that we were gonna get Chiefs Eagles because God hates everyone. So we'll see if that comes to pass. But hopefully the Bills can get back in, or not get well. I guess get back to the Super Bowl. Hopefully they would have more success this time around. I think Bills Washington is the Super Bowl everyone wants right now. We rarely get what we want in the sports world, so we'll see. But that is going to be it for this show, this episode of the show. If you've made it this far, make sure you follow the show and leave us a rating on any podcasting platform. If you're on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. You can find the show on Twitter at Payne and Drain. You can find me at ZachPayne41. You can find Alex at Alex_Drain. And Alex, do you have any last thoughts?
It was a fun Lions season, all things considered. A unfortunate ending, the way things went down, but I'll take 17 good weeks over one 18th bummer. I would definitely do it over again, even though hopefully next year, if we do it over, then the playoffs will go a little differently.
Yeah, and I think every Lions fan would happily trade a few regular season wins if it meant a run to the Super Bowl. So we'll see. We'll be back either next week or the week after to preview the Super Bowl, and we'll do a full Lions season recap at some point as well. And obviously, make sure that we catch up on all the news that'll be coming out over the next few weeks as the Lions coaching staff gets gutted. We got free agency to talk about, all that. So we'll see you guys next time. Cheers.